The morning light filtered softly through the wide glass windows of the downtown branch of Wilshire Bank, the kind of place where everything gleamed, from the polished marble floors to the silver nameplates on each desk. The lobby was quiet, except for the rhythmic tapping of keyboards and the low hum of conversation between customers and tellers. Behind the counter stood Derek Mills, a young teller in his late 20s with a crisp shirt, a practiced smile, and a habit of looking people over before greeting them. He liked to think he could tell who was worth his attention before they even opened their mouths. Around mid-morning, a woman stepped through the glass doors, moving slowly, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had lived long enough not to rush for anyone. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She was 63, dressed neatly in a light grey cardigan and pressed skirt, her silver hair pulled into a bun. She carried a small purse and a white envelope containing a check, her pension payment, from a lifetime spent as a school secretary. She had waited all week for this deposit. It was the difference between paying rent on time and stretching her groceries another few days. She joined the short line and waited patiently, ignoring the faint stares from a few customers who noticed her worn shoes and simple clothes. When it was her turn, she stepped forward, offering a gentle smile. "Good morning," she said softly, sliding her ID and check across the counter. "I'd like to deposit this, please." Derek barely looked up from his screen. His eyes flicked to her, then to the check. He saw the amount, $6,000, and frowned. "You said you want to deposit this?" "Yes, that's right," she replied. "Into my account. It's my pension." He tapped on his keyboard a few times, his tone turning dismissive. "Do you have an account here, ma'am?" Evelyn's voice stayed calm. "Yes, I've had one for over 15 years. He clicked again, squinting at his screen. "You sure about that? Because I'm not seeing anything current under this ID." She leaned forward slightly. "That can't be right. I was just here 2 weeks ago." Derek sighed, impatience creeping into his voice. "Sometimes people think they have an account when it's actually been closed or flagged. Happens a lot." His tone stung, but she stayed composed. "I assure you, young man, my account is fine." He glanced at her again, his eyes scanning her cardigan and modest jewelry. Something in his expression hardened, as if her calm confidence bothered him. "You mind telling me where this check came from?" "It's from the state," she said simply. "My retirement benefit." Derek picked up the check, holding it between his fingers. "You'd be surprised how many of these turn out to be fake," he said with a faint smirk. Evelyn blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me?" "It's policy," he said quickly. "We have to be careful. People try all sorts of things." "I worked 30 years for that," she said, her voice still steady, but quieter now. "That's not one of those things." Instead of listening, Derek rolled his eyes slightly and waved toward another teller. "Hey, can you take a look at this? Something about it doesn't seem right." The other teller glanced over, shrugged, and said, "Could be fine, could be printed wrong." "I'd run a scan." Derek nodded, sliding the check under the scanner. The machine beeped twice. He frowned, then looked up at Evelyn. "It's not verifying properly. You sure you didn't get this from one of those prepaid companies or something?" Her heart sank. "It's my pension check," she said again, more firmly this time. "That's my name, that's my address, and that's my money." He sighed again, shaking his head. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Look, I can't process this right now. I'm going to have to hold it for verification." Evelyn's face fell. "For how long?" "Could be a few days," he said casually. "Or a week. Depends." She hesitated, trying to stay composed. "I have bills due today. I really can't wait that long." "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, though his tone carried no trace of sympathy. "That's how it works." She reached out gently. "Please don't hold it. It's real. You can call the issuing office if you need to." He smirked. "Ma'am, if I called every office for every questionable check, we'd never get through a day." She drew in a slow breath, still refusing to let her frustration show. "Questionable," she repeated softly. "Because of what, exactly?" He shrugged. "Let's just say it doesn't look right." The line behind her had grown and she could feel eyes on her back. Her cheeks warmed, but she stood her ground. "I've banked here for 15 years, she said again, more quietly now. "Please, just deposit it." Derek hesitated, then gave a small laugh, shaking his head. "You know what? Let's save us both some time." He picked up the check, tore it neatly in half, and dropped the pieces into the waste bin behind the counter. The sound of tearing paper seemed to echo across the room. Evelyn's breath caught in her chest. For a moment she didn't move. The noise of the lobby blurred, replaced by the pounding in her ears. When she finally found her voice, it came out in a whisper. "Why would you do that?" He shrugged, pretending it was nothing. "Policy. Can't accept what looks fraudulent. You can take it up with the issuer." Her lips trembled, but she steadied herself. "That was my only copy." "That's not my problem," he said flatly. The woman behind her in line gasped quietly, but no one said a word. Evelyn stood there still as stone, her fingers gripping the counter. Then she straightened, her voice calm again, though it carried a quiet strength that made Derek glance up despite himself. "You'll regret that," she said simply. He snorted, rolling his eyes. "I doubt it." She picked up her ID, placed it carefully in her purse, and walked out of the bank without another word. Her steps were slow but measured, her back straight, even as her heart broke from the humiliation. That afternoon, Derek told the story in the break room, laughing with another teller about the lady who thought she could cash a fake check. They laughed about her clothes, her old-fashioned purse, the way she said please too many times. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that just a few blocks away, in a tall office overlooking the city, the CEO of Wilshire Bank was finishing a meeting with the board. His name was Marcus Carter. He was sharp, respected, and known for his integrity, and in about an hour, when his phone rang and he heard his mother's voice trembling on the other end of the line, everything about Derek's morning would begin to unravel. Marcus Carter leaned back in his chair as the boardroom slowly emptied. The meeting had gone well. Quarterly growth was up, their digital infrastructure was expanding, and a new community outreach initiative was about to launch. Yet, as the door closed and silence filled the room, Marcus felt that familiar fatigue, the kind that came not from workload but from always having to be perfect. As one of the youngest CEOs in the banking industry, and one of the very few black executives in his field, every room he entered came with eyes that watched him a little too closely. He had learned to carry himself with measured calm, to let his results speak for him. He loosened his tie, rubbing the back of his neck when his phone began to ring. The name flashing on the screen made him smile instantly. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice softening. But the voice on the other end wasn't warm or steady. It trembled slightly, like someone trying to hold back tears. "Marcus?" He straightened in his chair. "Mom, what's wrong?" There was a pause. "I went to the bank this morning," she said. "The one on Wilshire and 8th. "All right," he said slowly. "What happened?" "I tried to deposit my pension check," she said quietly. The teller, he didn't believe it was real. Marcus frowned. "Didn't believe it was real? Why not?" Her voice wavered. "He said it looked fake. I told him I'd been a customer for years, but he wouldn't listen. Then he tore it up." For a few seconds, Marcus said nothing. His chest tightened. "He what?" "He ripped it in half," she said, her voice almost breaking. "Right there in front of everyone. I asked him not to. I asked him to just check again. But he laughed. I didn't want to cause a scene." Marcus's jaw clenched. His hand gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles went white. "What was his name?" "I didn't see." "He was young. Brown hair. Wore a tag that said Derek, I think." He took a breath through his nose, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Mom, you didn't do anything wrong. You hear me? Nothing." "I know," she whispered. "But it embarrassed me. I just wanted to put the money in my account. I didn't tell him who you were because that's not how you raised me. I didn't think I had to." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat dry. "You shouldn't have to," he said quietly. "You never should have to." They spoke for another minute, before she told him she was going to rest. When the call ended, he sat there in silence, staring at his reflection in the dark glass of the office window. The calm that usually defined him began to fracture. He thought of her standing there, being spoken to like she didn't belong, like she was less than human. He thought of the years she had spent raising him alone, working long hours at the school so he could go to college, never once complaining. Every achievement he'd earned, every meeting he led, every deal he signed, all of it had started with her sacrifices. And now some smug teller had looked at her and decided she wasn't worth respect. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision, his movements controlled but sharp. "Denise," he called, stepping into the hallway toward his assistant's desk. She looked up. "Yes, Mr. Carter." "Call the Wilshire branch. Tell the manager I'll be there in 20 minutes. I want every senior staff member in the conference room when I arrive." Her eyes widened. "Yes, sir." As he made his way to the elevator, he kept his expression composed, but his mind was racing. He had faced discrimination in boardrooms dressed in tailored suits. He had endured being underestimated, questioned and challenged because of how he looked. But nothing compared to the thought of his mother being treated like that, especially inside the very company he led. The drive to the Wilshire branch felt longer than usual, though traffic was light. The city outside his window blurred into streaks of motion, but he saw none of it. When his car pulled up to the curb, he paused for a moment, adjusting his cufflinks. He didn't want anger to lead him. He wanted clarity. He wanted everyone in that branch to remember what respect should look like, and he wanted them to feel the weight of forgetting it. Inside, the atmosphere was as he expected, polished, calm, controlled. The branch manager, a nervous-looking man in his 50s named Harold Brooks, rushed to greet him near the entrance. "Mr. Carter, I wasn't aware you'd be visiting today." "What an honor. Is your staff assembled?" Marcus asked. "Yes, of course, right this way." He followed Harold through the lobby where customers glanced up, whispering as they recognized him. The tellers behind the counter stiffened when they saw him approaching. Derek, who had been leaning against his station chatting with a co-worker, straightened up immediately. His practiced confidence vanished when he saw the CEO of the bank walking directly toward them. Harold gestured toward the conference room, but Marcus stopped at the counter. His eyes met Derek's, calm but unreadable. "You're Derek Mills?" "Yes, sir," Derek said quickly, his throat suddenly dry. "I understand you handled a customer's check this morning," Marcus said. "A woman named Evelyn Carter," Derek blinked. The name hit him like a small jolt of static. Yes, sir. I did. She came in with a check that didn't look legitimate." "Didn't look legitimate," Marcus repeated, his tone even but sharp. "So you tore it up?" Derek shifted. "Sir, I followed protocol. It's what we do with questionable checks." Marcus's voice stayed calm, but it carried an edge that cut through the room. "Did you confirm her account before making that decision?" Well, the system wasn't pulling up her name properly." "So you assumed she was lying," Marcus said quietly. "Without checking with your supervisor." Derek swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't mean any harm. It was a judgment call." "Yes," Marcus said softly, "it was. And it was the wrong one." Harold stepped forward nervously. "Mr. Carter, perhaps we should discuss this in private." Marcus didn't take his eyes off Derek. "We will," he said. "After I finish explaining something." He turned slightly, addressing not just Derek but the entire team. "Every person who walks into this bank deserves to be treated with respect. Not based on how they look, not based on what they wear. Respect is not conditional here. It's the foundation of trust. And when that trust is broken, it's not just a mistake, it's a failure of character." The room was silent. The hum of the overhead lights seemed louder than usual. Derek's face had gone pale. Marcus finally stepped back, his composure unbroken. "Ms. Carter is my mother," he said simply. The air in the room shifted. Someone gasped quietly. Derek's mouth opened, but no sound came. "The woman you dismissed, the one whose check you destroyed, she raised the man who signs your paychecks." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was heavier than anything he could have said. The silence inside the Wilshire branch was so complete that even the hum of the air conditioning felt intrusive. Every teller behind the counter stood frozen, eyes wide, pretending to look busy but unable to glance away. Derek's face had drained of color, his hands resting flat on the counter, like he was trying to steady himself against the weight of what had just been said. The CEO's mother, the woman he'd laughed at, the one whose check he had torn in two without hesitation. Marcus didn't look angry anymore. He looked composed, too composed. That calmness, that steady control was far more unsettling than any outburst. He turned toward the branch manager, his tone even but firm. "Mr. Brooks will use your office." "Yes, sir," Harold stammered. "Of course." He hurried ahead, holding the door open. Marcus gestured toward Derek. "You too." Derek followed, his steps heavy. Inside the office, the manager closed the blinds automatically, though it hardly mattered. The tension had already spread through the entire building. Marcus stood by the window for a moment, his reflection cast faintly in the glass. He could see the city beyond, bright and indifferent, the same world where his mother had been made to feel small. He turned, folding his hands in front of him. "Sit," Derek obeyed. His throat felt dry. "Sir, I didn't know." "If I'd known she was your mother," Marcus cut him off with a sharp look. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't have needed to know." He stepped closer, his voice low but controlled. "When my mother walked into this bank, she wasn't the CEO's mother. She was a customer, a woman who trusted this institution enough to keep her savings here for 15 years. And you humiliated her. Not because of her account, not because of her check, but because you looked at her and decided she didn't belong." Derek swallowed hard, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "I didn't mean to discriminate. I was following policy—" "No," Marcus interrupted quietly. "You were following assumption. There's a difference." The words landed with weight. Marcus took a breath, pacing once before continuing. "Do you have any idea what she's been through? My mother raised me alone. Worked 2 jobs, skipped meals to keep our lights on. She's the reason I'm standing here. And today, after all she's done, she walks into her bank, the one she's trusted for years, and you tear up her check like she's trying to cheat the system." Derek opened his mouth but couldn't find words. Every defense he had rehearsed sounded hollow now. Marcus turned to Harold. "I want her account reinstated immediately, and the funds replaced in full. I also want a written apology from this branch, not a template, a personal letter." "Of course, Mr. Carter," Harold said quickly. "We'll handle it right away." Marcus nodded, his eyes still on Derek. "And you," he said softly. "You'll write your own letter as well." "Yes, sir. But before that," Marcus continued, "you'll take a leave of absence." "Effective today," Derek blinked. "A suspension." "Call it time to think," Marcus replied. "I don't believe in firing people without reflection. Maybe this will teach you something about how your tone, your words, and your actions shape the experience of others." Derek nodded stiffly, unable to look him in the eye. "Yes, sir." Marcus walked to the door, then paused. His voice softened, but the conviction remained. "My mother forgave you before I did. She always does. But forgiveness doesn't erase accountability. Remember that." He left the office without waiting for a reply. As the door closed, Harold exhaled shakily, wiping his forehead. Derek sat motionless for a long time, the echo of Marcus's words replaying in his head. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of real shame, not because of the consequences, but because of what he saw in himself when he pictured the look on that woman's face. Meanwhile, across town, Evelyn sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling beside her untouched. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of a ceiling fan ticking softly overhead. She kept replaying the moment the check tore in half, how the sound had felt like something deeper breaking. She had told Marcus she didn't want him to make a fuss, but part of her knew he would. That was who he was, steady, fair, protective. Her phone buzzed. When she saw his name, she smiled faintly and answered. "Hi, sweetheart. Hey, Mom," he said softly. His voice was calmer now, but there was still a heaviness beneath it. "I went to the branch." "I know," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." She sipped her tea. "Did you yell?" He smiled faintly on the other end. "No, I don't yell." "I know," she said. "You get that from me," he hesitated. "I made sure they restored your check. You'll have the full amount by tomorrow." "That's not what mattered to me, Marcus." "I know," he said. "But it mattered to me." There was a quiet pause before she spoke again. "I don't want that young man to lose his job," she said softly. "You can't teach someone to see people differently by shaming them. It just makes them harder inside." "I didn't fire him," Marcus replied. "But I made sure he'll have time to think about it," she smiled. "Then you handled it right." "I learned from the best," he said. When the call ended, Marcus stood by his office window once more, the city stretching out below him. He thought about everything his mother had endured, the quiet moments of dismissal, the constant uphill climb, and how even success couldn't erase the ways the world tried to make people like her feel small. But today he'd done something she didn't ask for but deserved. He made someone see her the way he always had. The next morning, the branch staff gathered early before opening. The mood was subdued. Derek arrived in silence, holding an envelope. Inside was his handwritten apology. He'd stayed up half the night writing it, scratching out drafts until his words finally sounded honest. He approached Harold's office and handed it in. "It's for her," he said quietly. "If she comes back." That same morning, Marcus drove his mother to the bank himself. She didn't want the attention, but he insisted. As they walked in, the room fell quiet again, but this time for different reasons. People moved aside, not out of fear, but out of respect. The glass doors of Wilshire Bank opened quietly as Marcus guided his mother inside. Sunlight spilled across the polished floor, reflecting off the marble like a soft glow. Evelyn walked slowly beside him, her small purse held neatly in her hands, her composure intact despite the tension that seemed to hum through the air. She hadn't wanted to come back. She told Marcus the night before that the idea of stepping into that place again made her heart ache. But when he asked her to trust him, she agreed, because that was what she'd always done. The employees had been warned he was returning that morning, and though no official announcement was made, everyone knew. Conversations died as the two of them entered, the faint sound of a pen falling onto a desk, breaking the silence. Derek was nowhere near the counter. He had been told to wait in the manager's office until called. Marcus nodded at Harold, who approached nervously. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." "Ms. Carter, everything is prepared," he said, his voice careful. Evelyn smiled politely. "Thank you," she said, though her tone carried no warmth, only quiet civility. Harold led them to a private meeting room where a fresh check awaited, the same amount reissued with an official note of apology attached. Evelyn looked at it but didn't reach for it yet. She simply said, "This was never about the money." Marcus rested a hand gently on the back of her chair. "I know, Mom." After a moment, Harold excused himself and stepped outside, leaving them alone. Through the glass wall, they could see the staff pretending to work while glancing over. Evelyn sat still, her posture perfect, her voice steady when she spoke. "You handled this kindly, Marcus. You didn't embarrass anyone." He smiled faintly. "You taught me that strength doesn't need to be loud." They sat in quiet for a moment before there was a soft knock at the door. Derek stepped in hesitantly, his expression humbled, his posture smaller than before. He was dressed neatly but looked like he hadn't slept much. In his hand was an envelope. "Ms. Carter," he began, his voice unsteady, "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you. I didn't listen. I made assumptions I had no right to make." She looked up at him, her eyes gentle but unreadable. "I accept your apology," she said softly. He blinked, surprised. "You do?" "Yes," she said, "because you're trying to make it right now. That matters more than the mistake." He nodded, his throat tightening. "I wrote this for you," he said, placing the envelope on the table. "It's the letter Mr. Carter asked for, but I added something at the end. I joined the volunteer program your son started. The financial literacy one. I figured if I'm going to work in this field, I should start learning what respect really means." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. "Good," she said finally. "Then make sure the next person who stands at your counter feels like they belong there." He nodded, unable to meet her eyes for long, and left the room quietly. Marcus exhaled slowly once the door closed. His mother looked at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "He learned something today." Marcus nodded. "So did I," she tilted her head. "What's that?" "That fairness," he said, "isn't just about policy or rules. It's about the tone in your voice when you speak to someone who's trusting you with their dignity." She smiled. "You sound like your father." He laughed softly. "I sound like you." They stood, and as they left the meeting room, the atmosphere in the bank seemed different. The employees greeted her respectfully this time, their eyes softer. She nodded politely to each one, not out of pride but with quiet grace. Before they reached the door, she paused near the counter, the same one where she'd been humiliated days earlier. She placed her hand lightly on it, not to relive the memory but to reclaim it. Outside, the city air felt cool and bright. Marcus opened the door for her, and she stepped out, her shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. As they walked toward his car, she looked at him and said, You didn't have to come all the way down here, you know. He smiled. Yes, I did. Some things deserve to be faced, not just fixed. She nodded, her expression proud and calm. You're a good man, Marcus. He looked ahead at the busy street. I had a good teacher. When they reached the car, he helped her in, then paused for a moment before closing the door. Through the bank's glass facade, he could still see the counter, the reflection of his mother's grace lingering in the space where disrespect had once lived. For the first time, he felt like the institution truly carried the values he wanted it to stand for, not because of new policies or meetings, but because one woman had shown what dignity looked like when the world tried to take it from her. Later that afternoon, Evelyn sat in her apartment with the new check on the table beside her. But she didn't look at it. Instead, she opened Derek's letter. It wasn't long, only a few lines, but it was sincere. He had written about the shame of realizing how easily he had devalued someone for reasons he didn't even understand. He ended it with, "You taught me that respect is not about position. It's about how we see people before we know who they are." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small box on her bookshelf, the one where she kept her most meaningful things. Marcus's childhood drawings, her wedding photo, her first teaching certificate. The letter fit there perfectly. That evening, as the city lights flickered outside her window, she brewed a cup of tea and smiled softly to herself. The humiliation she had felt was gone, replaced by something better. Not revenge, not triumph, but peace. Her son hadn't just defended her. He had reminded everyone what real decency looked like, and in that quiet apartment, Evelyn Carter felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, seen, respected, and whole again,